Hi, this is the US-North Korea relationship and nuclear weapons presented by the Fuji files, clarity on the war arsenal between USA and North Korea. Start with the 1980s. In 1985, North Korea adheres to the Non-Proliferation Treaty (NPT). In the near future, it links the Safeguards Agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA) with the withdrawal of US nuclear weapons from South Korea. To the 1990s. In 1991, President George Bush announces unilateral withdrawal of all naval and land-based weapons deployed abroad, with approximately 100 US nuclear weapons based in South Korea. Soviet President Gorbachev reciprocates. Wu, President of South Korea, announces denuclearization of Korean Peninsula. This would allow North Korea conditions for allowing IAEA inspection of all its nuclear facilities, which in turn North Korea concludes safeguards agreement with the IAEA, which is later ratified. North Korea declares 7 sites and 90 grams of plutonium to IAEA inspection, for which the US then imposed missile sanctions on North Korean entities. IAEA requests special inspection of 2 sites which store nuclear waste based on that North Korea cheating on NPT commitments. North Korea announced intention to withdraw from NPT, citing Article X provisions for national security. Following discussions with the US base in New York, North Korea suspends decision to pull out from NPT and agree to impartial application of IAEA safeguards, and US agree not to interfere with North Korea internal affairs. Second round talks with the US say North Korea considered replacing graphite nuclear reactors with light water reactors, which are proliferation resistant. CIA estimate that North Korea separated 12 kilograms of plutonium and may have produced even 1 or 2 nuclear weapons. North Korea finalizes an agreement to allow IAEA inspections of its 7 declared nuclear facilities, averting sanctions by United Nations Security Council. On arrival of IAEA, North Korea refused to inspect plutonium processing plant in Yongbyon. IAEA confirmed North Korea began removing spent fuel from its 5-megawatt nuclear research reactor. North Korea announces withdrawal from IAEA, but still comply with IAEA inspections as part of NPT and also IAEA safeguards agreement. Former US President Jimmy Carter negotiates deal with North Korea's willingness to freeze its nuclear weapons program. North Korean President Kim Jong-un II dies and is replaced by his son Kim Jong-il. The US and North Korea conclude 4 months negotiations by adopting the agreed framework in Geneva. This agreement calls for North Korea to freeze all its nuclear facilities, which meant dismantling 3 nuclear reactors. North Korea also allows IAEA to verify compliance through special inspections and allow 8,000 spent nuclear reactor fuel elements to be removed to a third country. The accord also serves as a jumping-off point for US-North Korean dialogue on Pyongyang's development and export of ballistic missiles. IAEA confirmed that construction halted at North Korea's Yongbyon and Daecheon nuclear facilities and that these are not operational. Korean Peninsula Energy Development Organization, (KADO), a multinational consortium, is formed in New York with the US, South Korea, and Japan as its members. The US and North Korea meet in Berlin suggests that North Korea should adhere to Missile Technology Control Regime, a voluntary international agreement aimed at controlling sales of ballistic missile systems, components, and technology. The US imposed sanctions on North Korea and Iran for missile technology-related transfer. Preparations were being made for a test of its Nodong missile, which led to a reconnaissance ship being deployed to Japan after several meetings of missile tests was cancelled. More talks over Nodong missile and Scud missiles led to the imposition of more new sanctions on 2 North Korean entities for unspecified missile proliferation activities. South Korea's Daejeon inaugural policy announced Sunshine Policy to improve Korean relations. US imposes sanctions on North Korea and Pakistan in response to Pyongyang's transfer of missile technology to Pakistan's Khan Research Laboratory. North Korea launches 3-stage Taepodong 1 rocket that flies over Japan. Third round of US-North Korea talks held in New York, where US repeats its request for Pyongyang to terminate its missile programs in exchange for relief from economic sanctions. North Korea rejects on basis of the lifting of these are implicit in 1994 agreed framework. President Bill Clinton appoints William Perry to serve as North Korea coordinator, and the US and North Korea hold talks about a suspected underground nuclear facility at Kamjungni. Pyongyang agrees to U.S. inspection but not for agreed appropriate compensation. CIA Director George Tenet testifies North Korea able to deliver to Alaska, Hawaii, and continental U.S., albeit with poor accuracy. More U.S.-North Korea talks held and proposes a North Korea restraint for sanctions relief, but can only agree to meet again. The U.S., South Korea, and Japan established a trilateral coordination oversight group for close consultation and policy coordination with North Korea. U.S. inspection team visit Kamjong-ni and find no nuclear activity that violates agreed framework. During talks in Berlin, North Korea agreed to moratorium on long-range testing of missiles where U.S. lifts sanctions. 5 years after agreed framework signed, CADO officials signed a turnkey contract with Korea Electric Power Corporation to begin construction of LWRs in Kumho, North Korea. It's gone to the 2000 era. The U.S. imposes sanctions on North Korea firm Changwon Sinyoung Corporation for proliferating MTCR Category 1 items, possibly to Iran. Following a historic summit, North Korea and South Korea signed a joint declaration reunifying the Korean Peninsula, which includes reuniting families divided by the Korean War. U.S. releases sanctions on North Korean commercial and consumer trade, investment and financial transactions, but sanctions related to terrorism and missile proliferation remain in place. Koreans also demand compensation for halting missile exports for a sum of $1 billion per year. In meeting with Russia's Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un proposes to end country's missile program in exchange for satellite launches. U.S. ambassador travels to Russia and confirms details of Kim Jong-un's second proposal for missile proposal with counterparts. U.S.-Korean talks resume in New York on nuclear issues, and the two countries issue a joint statement indicating progress on removing North Korea from the State Department's terrorism list. Secretary Albright visits Pyongyang to meet with Kim Jong-un second, where he says he will not test the Taebodong-1 missile. Seventh round of missile talks in Pyongyang ends without agreement in Kuala Lumpur and the failure to diminish hopes of President Clinton visiting Pyongyang before the end of his term. The U.S. imposes sanctions on Changwon Sinyoung Corporation for violation of Iran Non-Proliferation Act 2000. Wendy Sharman stated that a deal with North Korea came tantalizing close to end nuclear weapons under the Clinton administration, but the verification of a missile deal always became a stumbling block. George Bush started negotiations while requesting for this verification, but never materialized. North Korea reacts and threatens to take thousands-fold revenge on the U.S. and its black-hearted intention to torpedo the dialogue between North and South Korea. Kim Jong-un stated that he will extend moratorium on missile testing until 2003 and was committed to the second Inter-Korean summit. State Department imposes sanctions for the second time on Changwon Sinyoung Corporation for missile transfers to Iran. During a meeting with Moscow's Putin, Kim Jong-un reaffirmed pledge to maintain moratorium on ballistic missile tests. In his State of the Union address, President Bush criticized North Korea alongside Iraq and Iran constituted as an axis of evil, arming to threaten world peace. President Bush issues memo that he will not certify North Korea's compliance with the agreed framework, but waives U.S. law prohibiting Washington from funding CADO. The U.S. urges North Korea to comply with IAEA safeguarding procedures for all nuclear facilities, but Pyongyang states it will not do for 3 years. The U.S. imposes sanctions on Changwon Sinyoung for transferring missile technology to Yemen. John Bolton, Undersecretary for Arms Control, criticizes North Korea for its missile, nuclear, and biological weapons programs. James Kelly, Assistant Secretary, states that concerns that North Korea's weapons programs, conventional force posture, human rights violations, and a humanitarian position. North Korea responds by saying that DPRK takes all necessary countermeasures pursuant to valid, proven army-based policy. North Korea sends letter to U.S. stating it's restarting one reactor, frozen under the agreed framework to General Electric suppliers, but U.S. states that this is enough plutonium for one nuclear bomb. North Korea states in a letter to IAEA that it is not pursuant to agreement with IAEA, will take unilateral action to remove the stills and monitoring cameras if IAEA does not act, which it does, and then removes all IAEA inspectors out of the country. IAEA respond that North Korea should reinstate all stills, and North Korea respond by pulling out of the NPT. Responding to North Korea's rejection of IAEA resolutions, the Board of Governors refers this to the UN Security Council. North Korea then declares peaceful weapons program and tests 2 short-range missiles that does not violate moratorium. US imposes sanctions on Changwon Sengyang Corporation for the missile transfer to Pakistan's Khan laboratories. US, North Korea and China hold talks in Beijing where admission was made that North Korea has nuclear weapons. North Korea calls for a non-aggression treaty to normalize bilateral diplomatic relations. President Bush waives the restrictions on US funding of CADO but restricts it to administrative expenses of CADO. North Korea states that it completed switchover of spent fuel in the direction of increasing its nuclear deterrent force. North Korea states that it may test nuclear weapons and that it will take a measure to open its nuclear deterrent to the public as a physical force if it does not change its negotiation stance. President Bush declares he is willing to provide multilateral agreement that the US will not attack North Korea but non-aggression practice off the table. CADO announces it will suspend construction of 2 LWRs for 1 year. North Korea allow unofficial US delegation to visit one nuclear reactor for one member to hold a plutonium material to show its nuclear deterrent. The US states that Libya received uranium hexafluoride from North Korea. North Korea then announces that it has produced nuclear weapons. North Korea then states that it is not bound by the 5-year-old moratorium. The US states during a meeting with North Korea that they stated that might give nuclear weapons to terrorists if put in a corner. North Korea refuels its reactor at Yongbyon and begins reprocessing the 8,000 spent fuel rods removed earlier. US Treasury Department announces that it has frozen assets of 3 Korean entities responsible for best weapons of mass destruction, as well as barred US citizens within doing business with those entities. During a meeting with China's Jintao, Kim Jong-un states that it has his father's dying wish for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The Department of Treasury designates Macau Bank, Banco Delta Asia, as a primary money laundering concern, freezing about $25 million in North Korean funds. The 6-party talks are held again in China, where North Korea issued a statement that it will commit to abandoning all nuclear weapons and returning it to the NPT and to IAEA safeguards. North Korea states it is essential for the US to provide LWRs as early as possible. 5th round of 6-party talks begin in Beijing, where South Korea and Japan separate outstanding issues into 3 categories: dismantling of Pyongyang's nuclear weapons program, provision of economic and energy assistance to North Korea, Pyongyang's bilateral issues with Washington and Tokyo. North Korea announced it will pursue construction of larger graphite moderated reactors where construction had been frozen under the agreed framework. North Korea says it would return to talks with the US if they lifted the freeze of Bank of Delta Asia's funds of $25 million. CADO board formally terminates project to build 2 LWRs in North Korea based on the continued failure to comply with the agreed framework. North Korea test fires 7 ballistic missiles, including its longest range missile, the Taepodong-2. UN Security Council adopts Resolution 1695 condemning North Korean missile launches and returns to 6-party talks and suspends its missile launches. North Korea undertakes an underground nuclear test near village of Pyongyang. North Korea states that it was purely attributed to US nuclear threat, sanctions and pressure was compelled to prove its nukes to protect its sovereignty. The 5th round of 6-party talks happened in Beijing and come to no conclusion because of disagreements of the frozen funds of Banco Delta Asia. Action plan is formulated to halt operations of Yongbyon plant during the 60-day initial phase in exchange for 50,000 tons of heavy fuel. Pyongyang also provide complete declaration of all its nuclear programs and disable all nuclear facilities for 95,000 tons of heavy fuel. IAEA director visits North Korea and invites them back to being a member state discussed with the monitoring and verification role. Treasury Department then announces reached an understanding will release the frozen funds and North Korea says it will be for the use for the betterment of North Korean people. IAEA confirmed shutdown of Yongbyon facility. 6th round of 6-party talks conclude with the US stating removing the North Korean from the state sponsors of terrorism list. South Korean president visits North Korea and declares the steps taken for reunification, easing military tensions, expand meetings of separated families, and engage in social cultural exchanges. US technical teams will discover traces of enriched uranium and aluminium tubes North Korea shared with the US officials. Unclear if North Korea did this or if North Korea imported materials which were contaminated abroad. North Korea stated that it worked on declaration of disablement and notified of its contents, and the US was delaying the delivery of heavy fuel to North Korea. US states that North Korea showed two US officials conventional weapon systems it would claim were the recipients of thousands of tubes which did not work with one system, but US accepted it with the second conventional weapon system. South Korean President Lee Myung-bak is inaugurated. US-North Korea meet in Singapore and reach agreement on North Korea accounting of its plutonium-based nuclear weapons program and an acknowledgement of US allegations regarding of its proliferation and uranium enrichment activities. Pyongyang delivers a declaration to China, the six-party chair, and indicates North Korea separated 30 kilograms of plutonium. President Bush enacts law to waive sanctions related to 1994 Glen Agreement amendment following its 2006 test. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un suffers a stroke. North Korea states that US has not carried out its commitment to remove North Korea from its state-sponsored terrorism and will thus delay disablement of Yongbyon facility. North Korea nearly completed missile tests on western coast of Pongdong-D. A new agreement gives inspectors access to all its 15 sites relating to North Korea plutonium production program and allows inspectors to carry out sampling. US removes North Korea from its list of state sponsors of terrorism. North Korea will now continue disablement of Yongbyon nuclear complex. US complete final shipment of its heavy fuel oil placed to North Korea. Six-party discussions on verification, disablement, and energy assistance in Beijing ended in stalemate due to failure to reach agreement on verification. State Department suspends delivery of heavy fuel until verification provided. Russia and China do not share the same understanding and continue shipments of others' energy. North Korea declares that verification should be reciprocally provided by US and South Korea with the withdrawal of nukes from South Korea. South Korean deputy negotiator went to Pyongyang with the aim of purchasing 40,000 fresh nuclear rods, but North Korea demanded exorbitant amount of heavy fuel. North Korea launches three-stage Unha-2 rocket. North Korea claims rockets placed satellite into orbit, but US claims first stage landed in Japanese waters. Pyongyang announces that it will withdraw from six-party talks and fully process Yongbyon spent rods. After the US placing restrictions on 3 North Korean entities, North Korea conducts an underground nuclear test. UN adopts Resolution 1874, which places enhanced restrictions on North Korean firms, an arms embargo in the country, and strengthened council oversight and bars North Korea to do more tests. North Korea issues statement of countermeasures, including weaponizing all newly separated plutonium, continued development uranium enrichment, and respond to military to energy blockade. UN Security Council Ban Ki-moon appoints 8-person panel to 1718 resolution committee to assess implementation of sanctions. North Korea announced it has processed last 8,000 spent fuel rods from Yongbyon plant. Obama administration officials hold first senior levels meeting with North Korean government U.S. Special Representative for North Korean Policy Tan delivers Obama letter to Kim Jong-un. Thai authorities seized 35 tons of weapons from North Korean plane that made unscheduled landing in Bangkok and was heading to the Middle East. We're going to the 2010 era now. Pyongyang threatens South Korea with war after Seoul's statement it would invade North Korea if there was a threat of a missile strike. South Korean patrol ship Cheonan is sunk near North Korean maritime border. North Korea issues memo that would be party to non-proliferation and disarmament agreements on an equal footing with other nuclear weapon states. South Korea makes formal accusations against North Korea of sinking of Cheonan ship after investigations are made and severs all trade. US imposes new sanctions against Pyongyang on sinking of Cheonan ship, and President Obama signs executive order to increase financial restrictions on North Korea. The ruling Korean Workers' Party hold conference where Kim Jong-un's third son, Kim Jong-un, is made vice chairman of Central Military Commission. North Korea fires artillery rounds at the South Korean island of Yongbyon, killing 2 soldiers and injuring 17 others. North Korea tells a visiting Russian official it is willing to return to six-party talks to discuss the uranium enrichment activities. China proposes revitalization of six-party talks with first North Korea and South Korea, then US North Korea, and then the six-party talks. US warship forces a North Korean vessel to turn back off the coast of China. It was believed to be heading for Burma and refused inspection. After meeting Russian President Medvedev, Pyongyang said it was willing to observe a moratorium on production and testing of nuclear weapons in the context of presumed talks. After holding power for 17 years, Kim Jong-un dies and is succeeded by his son Kim Jong-un at 38 years. UN passes Resolution 2087 in response to North Korea's satellite launch, which further expands sanctions by putting freezes on assets of people of North Korea. The comprehensive test ban treaty for CTBTO detects seismic activity near North Korea site for which a UN Security Council meeting is called. UN Resolution 2094 is passed expanding sanctions on blocking bulk cash transfers. North Korea announces plans to restart Yongbyon nuclear plant, for which satellite imagery shows that this in fact started. i.e., calls for North Korea to come into full compliance with NPT. North Korea test fires 30 short-range rockets off its east coast, condemned by South Korea. North Korea then test fires 2 medium-range Rodong missiles into the Sea of Japan, violating UN sanctions. Both UN Security Council and China criticized the medium-range launch. North Korea fires three short-range projectiles off East Coast in retaliation to American film The Interview, which it threatens to kill Kim Jong-un. Analysis indicates that North Korea has a submarine capable of launching ballistic missiles. North Korea announced it offered to suspend nuclear testing on exchange for US and South Korea to call off joint military exercise, for which US rejects. North Korea tests fire 5 short-range ballistic missiles from Wonsan, which fly 125 miles northeast into the ocean. North Korea launches ballistic missile from submarine that traveled 150 meters. North Korea then launches 2 more from a submarine, one unsuccessful, one successful. North Korea announced it has detonated a hydrogen bomb, for which CTBTO detected seismic activity for which they doubted was a hydrogen bomb. North Korea launches long-range ballistic missile, drawing on international condemnation. UN Security Council adopts Resolution 2270 not to conduct further tests and expand sanctions, including financial and aviation. North Korea then launches intermediate-range ballistic missile, the Musasdan, and then tests a submarine missile which flew 30 kilometers. North Korea then tests two intermediate-range Musasdan missiles, considered a failure. North Korea then tests another Musasdan missile. North Korea then launches 2 more Musasdan missiles, taking the total to 6 in 2016, for which UN Security Council announces condemnation and then calls on all member states to impose sanctions. South Korea and US announced to deploy Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Battery THAAD to South Korea to intercept short and medium-range ballistic missiles. North Korea fires medium-range ballistic missile Nodong, which lands in Japan's exclusion zone. North Korea then tests SLBM, the KN-11, which flies approximately 500 kilometers before landing in ocean, and then tests 3 medium-range ballistic missiles which travel 1,000 kilometers. North Korea then tests new ballistic missile, the Pokokson-2. Kim Jong-nam, the older other half-brother of Kim Jong-un, is killed in Malaysia airport with chemical nerve agent. North Korea denied responsibility. North Korea then launched 4 ballistic missiles that travel 1,000 kilometers and lands in Japan's exclusion zone. President Trump and Xi Jinping meet and agree to cooperate on Korean denuclearization. Trump administration calls for more sanctions on North Korea. The THAAD missile defense system becomes operational in South Korea. North Korea tests the Hwasong-12 missile, which is an intermediate-range missile. The US imposes sanctions on the individuals and entities linked to the North Korean nuclear program. North Korea tests the Hwasong-14 missile, which said its range would have been 6,700 kilometers. Japan, South Korea, and US announced that North Korea tested the ICBM, which had a range of 10,400 kilometers. UN Security Council announces more sanctions banning coal, iron, seafood, and lead. A leaked document said that North Korea can produce nuclear wellheads for ballistic missiles. In response to Trump's remarks, North Korea announced it will launch a missile that will fly over Japan and land near Guam. North Korea then tests the Hwasong-12, which flies over Japan. The next day, President Trump said all options are on the table. North Korea conducts its 6th test, which it claims was a hydrogen bomb. Seismic data later revealed it was not. US Security Council opposes sanctions banning textiles and cap on refined petroleum products. North Korea fires ballistic missiles Hwasong-12, which flies over Japan. Trump later said it would destroy North Korea and that the Rocket Man is on a suicidal mission. Kim Jong-un then said Trump is mentally deranged and that a frightened dog barks louder, and threatened with a hydrogen bomb test over Pacific Ocean. Trump delivered a speech to South Korean Assembly and warned North Korea don't underestimate the US would need to take steps to denuclearization. Trump meets South Korean leader and agreed to cooperate with each other and have China leverage to achieve a diplomatic solution. President Trump officially designates North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism. North Korea launches intercontinental ballistic missile, for which UN Security Council imposes additional sanctions on refined petroleum products, imports, crude oil exports, and expulsion of North Korean workers from other countries in less than 2 years. Representatives from both North and South Korea meet in demilitarized zone for first inter-Korean talks since 2015. North Korean hold military parade. There were displayed new solid fuel short-range ballistic missiles, as well as Hwasong-14 and Hwasong-15 intercontinental ballistic missiles. South Korean security advisor briefed President Trump on inter-Korean meeting, including commitments by Kim Jong-un not to conduct nuclear tests and invite President Trump to meet Kim Jong-un to achieve permanent denuclearization. A telephone hotline set up between North Korean and South Korean leaders. Kim Jong-un declares he would suspend nuclear testing on April 21st and shut down Pyongyang test site where previous tests were carried out. North Korea releases 3 American detainees. North Korea reports it destroyed the Pyongyang nuclear test site. President Trump meets with Kim Jong-un at Singapore Hotel and signed a declaration on joint peace between US-DPKR relations. The IAEA's annual report on safeguards in North Korea states that continuation of nuclear capabilities is cause for grave concern. Kim Jong-un delivers New Year's address stating he is willing to meet President Trump anytime, committing not to make any test nuclear weapons. President Trump and Kim Jong-un meet for the second summit in Hanoi in Vietnam, where North Korea requested for sanctions to be lifted in its entirety in exchange for partial denuclearization. North Korea tests a salvo of rockets and short-range ballistic missiles. US seizes North Korean vessel for sanctions evasions. President Trump does not consider the launch of the short-range missiles a breach of trust or UN security violations, and also receives a beautiful letter from Kim Jong-un that something positive will happen very soon. Trump administration announced extended sanctions which were about to expire due to North Korea's existence and the risk of nuclear proliferation. President Trump meets with Kim Jong-un at the DMZ and becomes first US president to do so. North Korea tests 2 short-range ballistic missiles, the KN-23, which was successful. North Korea then fires 2 more KN-23s and fires 2 quasi-ballistic missiles considered more advanced than the KN-23, which was successful. UK, France, and Germany condemned the provocations by North Korea. North Korea tests a 600-kilometer multiple rocket launcher system. North Korean chief negotiator threatens to resume long-range ballistic missile testing unless US changes its attitude towards North Korea. North Korea released a statement it condemns the US-South Korea military exercise it is holding in South Korea and considers it a US hostile attitude. US Defense Secretary announced it is abandoning the military exercise to keep door open with North Korea. North Korea tests a super large launch rocket system overseen by Kim Jong-un. North Korea successfully tests at the Sahel satellite launching ground, which would contribute to bolstering its reliable strategic nuclear deterrent. Now we have the 2020s and the future. South Korean leaders said that the need to find realistic ways to further Korean cooperation suggests reconnecting inter-Korean roads and railways. North Korea launches 2 short-range projectiles, the KN-25 in its first launch of 2020. North Korea then launches a test of 3 projectiles of the KN-25 with South Korea stated that it could be joint strike drills but included multiple rocket launches. North Korea then test launches the KN-25, marking its 4th test of the year. UN Security Council issues a report stating that Pyongyang continued development of its nuclear ballistic missile programs and listed imported and exported sanctioned items along with continued cyber attacks. North Korea then tests a series of missiles including that of a cruise missile. South Korean media states that North Korea tested a Hyunmoo 4 missile which is assessed to carry a 2-ton payload greater than any of North Korea's other missiles. North Korea demolishes a North-South Korea liaison office located in North Korea. The head of the Central Committee of Workers' Party of Korea states that Korea should not accept any offers of summits this year, no matter how badly the US wants it. She said that denuclearization is not possible at this time and can only be realized when there are major concerns on either side. That's the end of presentation of the Fuji files of US North Korea.